There's a specific moment in most people's lives when they realize that the thing holding them back isn't the world. It's not their circumstances, their luck, their opportunities. It's something far more difficult to escape from. It's themselves. Niccolo Machiavelli spent his entire life studying exactly what separates people who can be stopped from people who simply cannot. Not because they're stronger or smarter, though some are, but because they understood something about power that most people spend their entire lives never quite grasping. That understanding is what we're breaking down today, and I'm warning you now, this video doesn't end with you feeling inspired. It ends with you understanding at a level that changes how you move through the world, exactly why certain people move freely through circumstances that would stop most others cold. The final lesson is the one that will cost you something to learn, but it's the only one that actually matters. Stay until the end. Let's begin. Part 1. The prison you build in your own mind. Most people believe their limitations are external. The economy's bad, so they can't start a business. They don't have the right connections, so they can't get the job they want. They came from the wrong background, so they can't reach the level they aspire to. Machiavelli watched rulers with far fewer resources than their rivals accomplish far more, over and over again. He studied this pattern until he arrived at an uncomfortable conclusion. The limitations these less resourced rulers overcame weren't actually eliminated. They were simply treated as less important than the goal itself. Here's what most people get wrong about Machiavelli. They assume he was arguing for ruthlessness as an escape hatch from limitations. He wasn't. He was arguing that limitations only stop you if you accept them as stopping points instead of obstacles to navigate around. The prison you're in right now, if you're honest about it, is mostly built from your own beliefs about what's possible for you. Not entirely. Some limitations are genuinely real, but the ones that actually matter less than most people assume. Part 2. Why most people self-destruct. Before anyone else gets the chance. There's a pattern Machiavelli noticed in people who seemed to have every advantage and still failed spectacularly. Almost universally, they sabotaged themselves long before any external force got the chance to stop them. They'd be on the edge of success and somehow find a way to blow it up. They'd have an incredible opportunity and talk themselves out of it. They'd find themselves in a position to break through and mysteriously self-destruct instead. Machiavelli called this the greatest enemy a person could have. Not external opposition, but the internal voice that agrees with every person who ever doubted them. The people who cannot be stopped are the ones who have at some point made a decision to stop listening to that internal voice. Not to silence it entirely, you can't do that, but to refuse to treat it as an authority on what's possible. This is where the real work happens. Not in the external world, but in your own mind. In the specific moment when you're about to walk away from something you actually want because you're listening to a voice that's been predicting your failure for years. Part 3. The specific skill most people never develop. Machiavelli observed that the people who couldn't be stopped all shared one specific quality. They had learned to separate their sense of self-worth from the opinions of people around them. This doesn't mean they became indifferent to everyone. It means they became genuinely selective about whose opinion actually moved them. The person whose judgment they valued, because that person had actually earned it through demonstrated wisdom, through genuine care for their well-being, or through proof that they understood the situation better than anyone else. Those opinions mattered. Everyone else's doubt, everyone else's skepticism, everyone else's prediction of failure, that stopped mattering. This is the specific skill that lets someone navigate criticism without collapsing, rejection without shattering, and opposition without questioning whether they should just give up. It's the ability to listen without accepting the premise that someone else's doubt is actually a referendum on whether they should keep trying. Part 4. Why most opposition is actually information. Here's something that changes how you navigate opposition, if you're willing to think about it differently. Most of the people who stand in your way aren't actually trying to stop you. They're simply protecting their own position, which happens to be in the way of yours. Machiavelli's most successful moves often came from understanding why someone was opposing him, not because he agreed with their opposition, but because understanding the motivation told him exactly how much flexibility existed in the obstacle. Some opposition is immovable, but most opposition is just someone protecting territory they're afraid of losing. That fear, if you understand it, is actually useful information about where the weak points in their position actually are. This is the difference between someone who sees opposition as a personal attack and someone who sees it as a problem to understand and navigate around. The second person, almost by definition, cannot be stopped by opposition because opposition is just data, not a verdict. Part 5. The cost of staying small. One of Machiavelli's harshest observations was about the people who had every capability to become powerful, but simply chose not to, because power required them to make decisions they didn't want to be responsible for. They wanted success without the visibility that comes with it. They wanted influence without the weight of having influence. They wanted to win without anyone knowing they'd chosen to play to win. And because they refused to accept those costs, they stayed small. Not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked the willingness to pay the actual price that capability demands. This matters because most people who claim to want freedom or power are actually, if you listen closely, asking for freedom and power without the responsibility or visibility that comes with it. Machiavelli's view was that this isn't actually possible. Staying safe is available to anyone. Staying small is available to anyone. But freedom from being held back is not available to people who are unwilling to accept that being noticeable, being responsible, and being targeted by people who want what you have. These are the actual costs of power. Part 6. The specific mindset shift that changes everything. There's a moment, usually in a person's life when they're younger, where they realize that playing it safe doesn't actually protect them. It just keeps them small. Machiavelli believed this realization was the one that changed everything because it removed the false choice between safety and power. Once you truly understand that staying small doesn't actually protect you from pain, disappointment, or failure, it just protects you from the specific pain of having tried and failed at something that mattered, the entire calculation changes. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" Because the answer to that question is simply, "I'll be in good company with every person who ever tried anything that mattered." The question that starts mattering is, "What if I don't try?" And the answer to that question is far more depressing than any failure could ever be. Part 7. How to navigate the specific enemies you'll create. When you stop accepting limitations and start moving toward genuine freedom, you create enemies you didn't have before. People who benefited from your small version will resist your larger version. People who were comfortable beating you at something will fight when you stop playing that game. Machiavelli understood that this resistance was not a sign you should stop. It was a sign you were finally doing something that actually mattered. The people who cannot be stopped are the ones who understand that some opposition is inevitable, even necessary. Because opposition is how you know you're big enough to threaten someone. The goal is never to have no enemies. The goal is to have the kind of enemies that prove you're moving in a direction that matters. Part 8. Why temporary pain is the price of permanent freedom. Here's the truth, what almost nobody wants to hear about actually becoming unbreakable. It's not that you stop hurting, it's that you stop letting hurt stop you. Machiavelli's most dangerous adversaries weren't the ones without pain. They were the ones who had experienced plenty of pain and refused to let it become a reason to stay small. They had failed at things that mattered. They had been rejected by people they cared about. They had lost things they fought hard for, and instead of using these as evidence that they should stop trying, they used them as evidence that failure wasn't actually fatal. This is the specific calibration that separates people who cannot be stopped from people who simply haven't been tested enough yet. Not the absence of difficulty, the refusal to treat difficulty as a referendum on whether they should keep going. The final truth Here's what Machiavelli actually meant when he talked about power and unbreakability. He didn't mean a state where nothing can touch you. He meant a state where you've made peace with being touched, being hurt, being tested, and you've decided in advance that none of it is going to stop you. The person who cannot be held back is not the person who has never been held back. It's the person who decided at some point that being held back wasn't actually an option they were entertaining anymore. Not because they became invincible, but because they became willing to be broken and rebuild themselves while everyone watched. This decision, this specific mental decision that you're simply not going to be stopped, changes everything. Not because it eliminates obstacles, but because it changes what an obstacle is. It stops being a wall and starts being a problem to solve. The people who move most freely through the world are not the ones with the fewest obstacles. They're the ones who decided that obstacles aren't actually relevant to whether they keep moving or stop. And that decision is the only thing that actually separates people who can be stopped from people who simply cannot be. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. What's one limitation you've been accepting as real, that you're ready to start treating as just an obstacle? And if you're ready to become genuinely unbreakable, subscribe to Dark Psychology Secrets, because this is exactly what we're here to teach.